Ronin Beat Maker, and welcome to Lounge Ronin. All things, everything. And before we get into it, if you are new to the channel, please make sure to hit that like button and ring that notification bell, and make sure to subscribe. And please leave a comment with your thoughts below and a little seasoning of constructive criticism, as all of this would help the channel grow and allow me to create more and better content for y'all. And on this episode, we're going to discuss the Giants of West Virginia, Part 2. Now, if you haven't caught Part 1, I highly recommend you take a view before you take a look into season Part 2. But if you are just in for the ride and don't mind catching Part 1 another time, no worries. We'll probably have a little refresher on Part 1. But without further ado, let's get into it. All right. Now, this was updated in March 17th of 2016, and this is a co-written article by Jason and Sarah. Now, to give you a little quick refresher, in Part 1, we discussed a mound burial site that housed two giant skeletons, one to be 9 feet tall and the other to be 7 feet tall. The larger giant skeletal remain was taken by one of the archaeologists on site, and he did not publish his findings on the size of the skeletal remains until 30 years later. The excavation was done in the 1930s, I believe. And part of which, where I suspect why he did not, he waited so long, was the Smithsonian's policy on gigantic skeletal remains. They're to be either confiscated or destroyed or suppressed. And in Part 1, we covered a little bit about the burial site, the size of the bones, some of the God, what's the word I'm looking for? Some of the burial site remains, some of the arrowheads, flint tools, and we just covered a little bit of the Smithsonian, and how it's an extension of the federal government and how it's used to suppress and alter and obfuscate the true history of the United States, i.e. North America. And we also covered what the giants looked like. In Part 1, I personally observed in the pictures, and don't worry, there are some pictures of the giants in here as well, that they also have what I noticed to be elongated skulls. And in Part 1, I spoke about how they're the Cornwall Museum I did an entire live stream on the elongated skulls and the United States presidential bloodline that's connected to that. If you're interested in going into a deep dive, I highly recommend you check out that live stream. But essentially, just noticing the similarities between the elongated skulls of Paracas, Peru, and of Romania, and the features of the giants. And there seems to be some similarities in my own personal speculations, I should say again. But that's what we kind of covered a little bit in part one. So I highly recommend after part two, you go and take a listen to it. I see we got some people in the live stream on Rumble. Much love to you. Please, if you're so kind, make sure to hit that like button and share the stream, as I would greatly appreciate it. Now, let's actually get into it. It is important to note that in relation to the measurements published in the gigantic skeletons from the Zan Farm mounds, Sutton's method of determining height would actually have underestimated the size of the buried individuals, since the actual ratio of femur length to overall height is closer to 1/3, 0.5, or even 1/4 according to regression and absolute ratios used by scientists. A review of the published Johnson-Thompson Mound report, in light of this correspondence, raises interesting possibilities. The report is embellished with Sutton's unusual attention to detail. The mound contained 3 extended burials and 1 flexed in the secondary mantle, and 1 extended and 1 semi-flexed burial on the mound floor. There are 4 distinct cremations, although the large quantity of bone fragments suggests the deposits represent more than 4 individuals. And I'll mention that in part 1 we talk about how some of these giants were buried, and it's very interesting. It's very peculiar. Sutton provides meticulous detail regarding the burials, as with these 2 interments 14 inches below the mound floor. They had been placed in a north-south position with heads towards the south. One burial, 5 feet 11 inches long, was that of a male, and the other 5 feet 3 inches long, that of a female. The distance between the burials was 26 inches. A ridge of undisturbed subsoil separated them. However, 2 burials found in the northeast corner of the mound, burials 3 and 4, are not measured, even though the description offers numerous other details. Burial number 3, extended with the head towards northeast, was 35 inches above the mound floor. Burial number 4, with the skull to the southwest, was 27 inches above the mound floor. The skeletal material was in fair condition. Sutton notes that these burials were in the extended positions. This, along with their fair condition, makes the absence of measurements even more suspect in light of Potter's earlier inquiries regarding Sutton's measurement techniques. Does this absent data reflect the alteration of Johnson-Thompson Mound report to conform to the criteria of Potter and Beebe as mentioned in Sutton's letter? Now here we have the burial mound of Adine Culture, Grave Keek Mound in Moundsville, West Virginia. Now what's really interesting about some of these mounds is if you've seen like drawings of what some of these mound, you could say cities look like, they look very similar to a lot of the pyramid cities that you see in Mexico. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that the Mexicans were in North America, but what I'm saying is that there is obviously a similar in terms of structural designs. I mean, you know, you can look around the world and you look at the various pyramids, whether it's in, Mexico, whether it's in Greece or India, or in Indonesia. I think there might be some in Japan as well, if I'm not mistaken. But they're all different in regards to their designs. And what's interesting about the ones in North America is the fact that they seem to be mostly built with earth more than stone when you look at the other pyramids throughout the entire world. A lot of them are built with stone. But I'm also very suspicious that some of these mounds, if they were to be, riddled through North America, I should say, preface that a lot of these probably, if they were to be cleared up, cleaned out, would probably look like actual pyramids. That's the crazy thing about North America, is that there are pyramids in North America. They just prefer to call them mounds. Um, and you can go on Google and look up, the pyramids in Mexico, and do a before and after. And the before picture, it just looks like, a big hill. But then when they clear it up, get rid of all the bush and the vines and just the overgrowth of the jungle, you find this massive pyramid structure. I mean, that's one thing that they've been doing, throughout Mexico with LiDAR, ground penetrating radar, is that they've been able to find these massive cities within the jungles of Mexico, Peru, in Central America. And these cities from above, they are intricate, they are extremely detailed, and many of them, they look like microchips from above. So if you look into a lot of the things in relation to the pyramids in Egypt, and ley lines and the energy of the earth, then you begin to kind of question and make wonder if whether or not some of these positions of even the way the bodies are positioned, what is the implication of the bodies being buried in such a position, and what is the implication of these various pyramidal structures and mounds. I mean, in North America, there's the I think it's called Snake Mound. I know that Graham Hancock, he covered it in his Netflix series Ancient Apocalypse. And what was really interesting about Snake Mound, I know that there's a more correct name for it, so I apologize. If anyone knows the name, please feel free to correct me. But one thing that was fascinating about that, and it's in North America, is that it's an extremely, extremely accurate astrological calendar and clock. And it's made in the ground. And, it looks like, from above, it looks like a giant snake. But it looks mostly like a mound of dirt. But in my mind, I wonder if some of these, mound structures really have some real solid structure to them, whether it's rock, whatever it could be. I mean, especially Florida. Look into Florida. There's, from some of the researchers I've listened to, they've mentioned how Florida's riddled with pyramids, and that many of them are actually covered up on the golf courses, because Florida is golf course land essentially. So I think that we can definitely say that there's definitely something to be made uh, with the fact that we have so many of these structures all over the world, and no one seems to want to talk about the giant in the room. And I know Jimmy from Bright Insight, he did an incredible video talking about all the various pyramids around the world, and how at one point there must have been some form of worldwide civilization. And in um, in part one, they talk about how the giants may have lived on North America as long ago as 1,000 years. And whether or not you want to adhere to the idea of them being giants, I'm not here to tell you what to believe. You can go and look at all the religious texts and ancient texts that talk about them, whether it's from the indigenous American tribes, to Japan. I mean, there's stories, countless stories. Europe, but there are even stories about humans and giants coexisting, and also at times being enslaved. So there are so many stories about giants that, in my mind, when you start hearing similar features and the way they live, and you hear one story from indigenous tribes in North America and the way they describe the giants, but then you hear how they're described in the Middle East, or in Asia, and then you're hearing similar stories, you kind of have to ask yourself, like, what's going on here? So I'm one that, for you know challenging the mainstream narrative of our history, because I think it's important, especially now with the state of everything that's going on in the world, with censorship, with all that kind of stuff. We have to really be more willing to be open to ideas and investigate things. And everything here I'm saying, like I said, please go and look up this stuff yourself. If you're fortunate enough, hey, head down to West Virginia, see what other kind of things they have, and the artifacts. And that's another thing that's so fascinating about a lot of these mounds and stories, is that if you were to pull up old articles from the late 1800s, early 1900s, there are countless stories about mounds and giant bones being found in them, and caves with giant bones. I mean, the stories are endless. And yes, some of them turn out to be frauds, but then there are those that turn out to be true. And then the next thing you know, the Smithsonian comes in, and then bada bing, bada boom, it's gone. No mention of it, no acknowledgement. And if you were to ask the Smithsonian, they will, outright just hang up the phone on you. Ask the Y Files. He did a segment talking about the Egyptian artifacts that are in the Grand Canyon, and he referenced, talking about the giants when he called them up, and the woman pretty much kind of hung up on the phone. So I'm one to be like, hey, to challenge the narrative, and to kind of push things a little bit, because this stuff is there's so many stories and data and artifacts out there that you can look up and be amazed by, and go down the rabbit hole, and still not really come out really knowing the truth. But that's enough of the Ronin rant. Let's get back into this article. Measurements are also absent from one other flex and one extended burials from the mound, but this may be due to the fact that these two burials partly overlapped, making precise measurements difficult. Body snatchers. There are apocryphal sources detailing Sun's gigantic discoveries at Zan Mounds. One such account appears in Mounds Builders, Indians and Pioneers, 1956, by William Price. Price wrote many of his entries based on interviews with witnesses. The wording of this passage certainly implies that he gained his information from Sutton himself. And that was a thing that I was also kind of mentioning in terms of stories, is that not everyone had written text, and they did a lot of word of mouth. And in those word of mouth stories, if there's a consistency in the narrative or in the depictions, there's something there to look into it. And here we have a quote from William Price, Mr. Sun says that he believes the bones are recovered to have belonged to a very large skeleton. This idea corresponds with those gathered from other spots in the state and would lead one to think that a race of people who were larger than average size once lived through this part of the state. Quote Price. The author's investigation on the ground in Doddridge County revealed that Morganville, where the Zahn Farm mounds were located, is no longer a town. However, contact was made with a credible source who, for the time being at least, wishes to remain anonymous. According to this source, there was a second excavation of the Zahn Maxwell Mound in 1960, and another gigantic skeleton had been uncovered. As well with Page Lacard in 1929 as an assistant at the site had stolen the giant. We were given the name of this individual and we were told that the information was very sensitive due to the fact that surviving relatives still live in the region. The gigantic skeleton taken from the mound in 1930 was supposedly between 7 and 8 feet long and had subsequently been sold to a wealthy Western buyer. Now, this is something that frustrates me a lot, and I'm gonna refrain from going into a rant about it, but the amount of artifacts and antiquity that is locked up in private collections that could easily rewrite our history is so astronomically frustrating to me. And it's no different than the Vatican libraries in their basement. So I'm not surprised that it was sold to a Western buyer. I did a live stream, talking about this this Gnostic text, which talks about Christ being a shapeshifter, and that it was only recently made public because it was actually in the private collection of J.P. Morgan. So this is something that I find incredibly disappointing and frustrating, is so much of our true history is just being held as as someone's personal collection, like it's a bunch of Marvel figurines or Star Wars figurines. it's mind-boggling. But I continue. Following this, inquiries were made with the Ernest Sutton's surviving family members in Salem University as to the correct location of his materials. The authors were ultimately pointed in the direction of the Doddridge County Historical Society in the county seat of West Virginia. And here, this is a skeleton of a male giant and female dwarf displayed at the Royal College of Surgeons. So the Royal College of Surgeons skeletons of Middle Kirchani and Sicilian dwarf, and of O'Brien the Irish giant. Now I know that we also have to talk about the fact that there is that genetic mutation of gigantism, but I know also that with a lot of these gigantic skulls and remains, there's nothing of that to point to that case, because some of these giant bones, and all of them, if they have any of the hands or feet, they have 6 fingers, 6 toes. Some of them have a double row of teeth. So, there is a physical difference between them. And I've even seen videos. Now, I can tell that these videos aren't like CGI or anything like that, because they're just like, you can tell when a video is like CGI nowadays. When they do those fake kind of like UFO videos or like creatures and what have you. But most often you can be like, okay, yeah, that's definitely CGI. But several videos that I have seen where they were clear indication it was a female hand as well, that it had 6 fingers, and it moved like just a normal finger. Now it was obvious to me in my own speculation and just looking at it, that it wasn't like someone who had like a weird mutation and they had 6 fingers, but like the hand of this woman was massive. That was also the weird part about it. Like this woman's hand could probably wrap around like my face. And I got one of them Rihanna foreheads. So I think that like there is definitely a lot of just anecdotal evidence and just actual evidence to be like, whoa, there's something up here. And even an article that I read when I covered I've covered many different videos on giants. I love talking about giants and elongated skulls. It's my bread and butter. But in this article from the 1900s, it talked about how the width of the skull was large enough that it could bite into a coconut. So, you know, you know, it's pretty wild to even conceptualize, I think. So here we go. A revealing notebook. While reviewing Sun's materials, we were surprised to find a notebook in Ernest Sun's own handwriting containing none other than the detailed report of the second excavation of Mound 2 conducted in 1960. Now, the first time it was excavated was in the 1930s with Sutton. The journal contains excavation notes entered on a seemingly daily basis between May 31st, 1960 and July of the same year. This time the mound is referred to as the Powell Fox Mound due to the change of ownership of the 2 farms straddled by the tumulus. In an early dated July 6, Sun notes that a possible burial area had been located. This newly discovered tomb was located near those excavated 31 years previously, since July 7th entry mentions the rediscovery of the 1929 excavation as the mound floor was reached. Interestingly, the remaining pages of the journal, which would have contained the details of the excavation of the tomb, had been torn out and lost. Not surprised. An inventory of finds with the journal mentions that the burial was semi-flexed, 9 inches from the mound floor, but unfortunately no other measurements are given. Remarkably, and what's interesting about, before I continue, about the remaining page of the journal containing the excavation of the tomb had been torn or lost, there's always a habit when it comes to the Smithsonian, when it comes to these type of discoveries, of things either getting lost or destroyed or torn up. It seems to be an ongoing theme in our history. An inventory of finds with the journal mentions that the burial was semi-flexed, 9 inches from the mound, but unfortunately no other measurements are given. Okay. Remarkably, the notebook does contain consistent reference to the individual who was named by our source as taking a gigantic skeleton from the Powell Fox Mound during this second excavation. There is no question that this individual was an assistant in this unpublished second excavation in 1960. Our inquiries to this journal turned up the fact that the only person to handle it, other than Son's own family and the society, was Edward McMichael, state archaeologist of West Virginia between 1960 and 1967. Had these pages been removed to conceal inconvenient truths? And, that's kind of what I was saying is, there are so many things, there are so many stories of, incredible, archaeological discoveries or incredible feats of man being purposely destroyed or, quote unquote, accidentally destroyed, or concealed. And it's a frustrating thing. Imagine if the Egyptian antiquities were to display some of the things that they have in their basements that they know would completely break and collapse the narrative that they have been telling the world, or I should say they have been ordered to tell the world. But that is unfortunately the state of the world that we live in right now. I mean, look what happened during ISIS's reign of terror. The amount of archaeological discoveries and cities that were purposely destroyed. Why were they purposely destroyed? Is it because of the ideology, or is it because of the history? To, as they put here, conceal inconvenient truths. It's like the notion that, Christopher Columbus discovered North America when there were already people here, and they've been people here. The Aborigines, the American Aborigines, the Niji, the Moors were here. I mean, the Egyptians knew of North America when they were speaking with Solon. So, Christopher Columbus didn't discover anything. He was looking for India, and he came here, and he thought this was India. So, and you look into who was funding him and all of that. It's all of this stuff. It's always about following the money, and when you look into who's funding everything, then it kind of makes sense. All right, you look at it here: state archaeologist of West Virginia. Who funds the state archaeology? The state, but i.e. the federal government. I mean, it's like, it'd be foolish to not think that. The federal government has their hands in everything. I know we like to, advocate for, state rights, and I believe in that, but, let's be real right now. When the states are bought out, the federal government, has their hands to play. But this is not a political episode. This is an episode about giants. But it's kind of interesting, actually. I was talking with a friend, and she was telling me, we were talking about history, and she's like, yeah, I don't like talking about history. And I was like, why? And she's like, well, it's because it's politics. And I was like, no, history is not politics. But then I kind of thought about it, and I was like, you know what? Maybe she's right. And I think about it in terms of concealing these kind of historical discoveries that would rewrite everything. It's it's political to hide and obfuscate these truths because it go against the narrative. It goes against the funding. It goes against the money. So I think she definitely she had a good point there. I'll give her that one. Significant conclusions. Okay. The investigation of the Doddridge County Giants yielded several significant points, not only for giantology, but also the history of archaeology in the Ohio Valley. To begin with, the details of the newspaper articles associated with these particular finds were remarkably accurate, as noted above. Even the proper stratigraphy of the Zanfar mounds is inherent in the account, along with the correct artifacts from the site. Check out part 1 if you want to see those photos. This should raise some questions as to whether many of the more incredible articles extant regarding giants from mounds may not also contain accurate data. Certainly, all of these press stories utilized by giantologists can no longer simply be written off as yellow journalism in the face of comparisons such as these. The authors have found many more such instances to be included in their forthcoming book. Oh, interesting. The investigation also provided a rare glimpse into the relationship between skilled amateurs such as Ernest Sun and large organizations such as the Ohio Historical Society during the mid-12th century, the most important era of the development of woodland archaeology. In fact, it was people like Ernest Sun who pioneered the exploration of the tumul of the Andrea and the Hopewell cultures out of sheer love of the subject matter, though the establishment today largely downplays this fact. Yeah, I can see that. So here we have a depiction of what would be considered a North American giant. And like I said, I think the way the shape of the skull, very elongated. And I think there is definitely some interesting similarities between these and the elongated skulls of Paracas, Peru, and Bolivia, and of Romania. I bet you didn't know that there were elongated skulls in Romania. Yeah, there's a lot of them. And it's not of the head binding nature. Yeah, no. Those are born people of elongated skulls, a separate species of humans. And if you want to know more about that, I highly recommend you check out my live stream on the elongated skulls and the presidential bloodline. It gets pretty kinky. So yeah, here we have is a artist representation of a North American giant. Now, like I said, I said this in part 1. I like to humor ideas and various subject matters because I think it's important to be able to improve your ability to just be open-minded and to be able to read information and kind of weed out the BS and look for consistencies and patterns, and just get better at being your own researcher in life. Because I think for anything, anytime you improve on any skill in your life, that also improves everything else around you that you do in life. So a little something to keep in mind for anyone out there who's looking to improve on their skills. As evidenced by the correspondence between Sun and the Ohio Historical Society, check out part 1 for that. There was a clear editing and censorship of the field reports undertaken at the hands of individuals such as Raymond S. Beebe and Martha Potter. Sun's letter also mentioned several artifacts which Beebe himself removed from the site and failed to reproduce for the published report. This tendency of Beebe's actually beleaguered Sun's work on a regular basis. Seems like some sabotage going on. All right. Finally, the history of Zanfar Mound suggests that for some time there was an interest in acquiring gigantic skeletons. Our investigations suggest that individuals who joined as assistants to Sun's excavations may have looted this single site more than once during a period spanning over 30 years. According to our source, this practice was well known decades ago in the region. The question emerges as to who would have had such a desire for gigantic remains as to offer monetary reward for them. In relation to this, we would point out to the fact that after the late 1800s, the names of wealthy families and various philanthropies began to appear in the reports of mound excavations around the United States, often in connection with gigantic skeletons. In their forthcoming book, the authors will attempt to demonstrate what may have been the true motive for the confiscation of the race of giants from the historical records. So here we have an illustration from Mundus Subterraneus suggesting the fossil bones were from giants. So there you have it. The giants of West Virginia. And well, it seems like the entire Ohio Valley might be littered with all sorts of incredible artifacts and mysteries to be uncovered. And for me, what I really find interesting about all of this is what they said. Actually, I'm going to pull it back up. Pull it back up. Give me a moment. All right. At the end, at the bottom, talking about since our investigation suggests that individuals who joined as assistants to Sun's excavations may have looted this single site more than once during a period spanning over 30 years. And then it says here that the question emerges as to who would have had such a desire for gigantic remains as to offer monetary reward for them. In relation to this, we will point out to the fact that after the late 1800s, the names of wealthy families and various philanthropies began to appear in the reports of mound excavations around the United States, often in connection with gigantic skeletons. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up again was the fact that, and I mentioned this in part one, and I mentioned this earlier, the continuing notion of these private collections that house all sorts of archaeological artifacts and remains and technology that would completely rewrite everything. And then, it's also like, these wealthy families, and whether it's from the Rockefellers to the Rothschilds, what have you. And then in connection with, the federal government, and you look at the Smithsonian and the fact that the Smithsonian is an extension of the federal government, gets federal funding, it's no surprise to me. And the fact that the Smithsonian had a policy when dealing with gigantic skulls. Excuse me. So I feel that you have these wealthy elites who are paying people to essentially be operatives and work for these these amateur archaeologists and what have you. And then when the site gets closed down or taken over by the state archaeology Then you have these looters come in, they go into the site, they take things, and whether they're being funded by wealthy families or they're being funded by the Smithsonian and these, so-called, philanthropy groups, who then take these, archaeological discoveries, these remains, and then, lo and behold, they're gone. And then they're gone from history. And then we only get these reports or these articles or people who have taken the time and have done the research to find out about these various mysteries and their implications. And I think for any of us out there, it's right now, think of any of your modern day conspiracies, whether it's 9/11, whether it's COVID, whatever it may be. Kind of ask yourself, why the suppression of knowledge? Why now are these leaks or of information coming out that contradicts the narrative? And similar when it comes to whether it's giants or the Younger Dryas impact or whatever it may be. You have to kind of ask yourself, why are they so hell bent on keeping this certain narrative? And oftentimes, this narrative that they're forcing on us, it really dumbs us down if you think about it. It really leaves us arrogant and foolish and not willing to expand our horizons and our ideas and our thought processes. And I really do think that that's kind of much of the main goal for many of these, for the, the industrial, pharmaceutical, military, corporate oligarchs. Their plans and what they do is to really to dumb us down, to prevent us from really knowing our true potential and even knowing our true history, knowing our true knowledge, knowing who we really are. I recently learned a little bit of the origins of white people and how they come from the Yamani culture, which stems from Ukraine, which had its foundings really further east. But that's if you really want to know more about if you're a viewer and you are of Caucasian descent, I highly recommend you check out my part 1 and 2 of the dynastic race. We cover the pre and post diluvian races, and that is the deluge. It's very, very fascinating. So I highly recommend you check out part 1 and 2 if you're interested in knowing some of that knowledge. But the point is that when you take time and you look for knowledge and you look for credible researchers and resources that are going to give you the objective information, and they're not going to give you their personal feelings or edit the information to placate their ego and what they have convinced themselves and lied to themselves about. And I think that is also the case when it comes to this type of these conversations in regards to these bizarre and I guess unnatural archaeological discoveries. And I only use the word unnatural because it's unnatural to us because of the way we have been conditioned, the way we have been domesticated in terms of our belief systems, in terms of our history, in terms of how we are educated. And I think, that's one of the frustrating things when it comes to, for me personally, I should say, when it comes to learning about these new, I shouldn't really say new, but learning about the truth in a matter of speaking, it becomes increasingly frustrating to then sometimes have conversations with people and, knowing full well that they are speaking on inaccurate information, but sometimes I'll kind of present a question to them that'll kind of make them question the information themselves rather than me kind of necessarily telling them. And I'm getting better at it. But my whole point is that we need to, as individuals who advocate for freedom of thought, freedom of individuality, we need to look into these kind of things and humor it. If you don't believe it, that's fine. I'm not telling you that you have to believe in giants. I'm not telling you have to believe in any of that kind of stuff. But what I'm telling you is that, do your own research and look at the evidence, look at the skulls, look at the photos of these things. Look into the work of Brian Forrester and what he's been doing with the Paracas skulls and the elongated skulls in Peru and Bolivia. Look into that information yourself. You don't have to necessarily take my word for it. My whole point here is to just spark people's interest and to get them to want to look into these things and to pull up this same article and research these archaeologists or these events and find out the implications. What does it mean for you as a person? How does it change your perception of reality and this world? Are you going to remain stagnant, or are you going to flow and improve your the flow of your life and the flow of the information that you receive and how you receive it and how you interpret it? Because right now we're the way the world and the media and the information that we're acquiring, the way it's being manipulated and censored and just destroyed in front of our very eyes, we got to be more vigilant. We got to be more willing to just be more individual, more willing to question people and kind of call people out when they're presenting information or acting in a way that's completely inaccurate. There's nothing wrong with that. We've lost sight of holding people accountable and calling them out, and within reason. I know that they are the whole cancel culture and the far left. They love saying all sorts of crazy nonsense, but you gotta hold firm in your conviction and speak your mind truthfully and clearly and calmly. I know it's not always easy all the time. We're human. We're gonna get heated. We're gonna get into confrontational debates and heated debates and things of that nature, regardless of any information. But my own advice and what I'm learning is make sure you've done enough research to know what you're talking about, so that way you can feel confident in the information that you present to people, and then you allow them to make their own judgments. You allow them to make their own form their own opinions. And sometimes they might write you off, or they might not talk to you anymore. I'm sure plenty of people have experienced that over the last several 3 to 4 years with everything that's going on, that your opinions or what you believe may cost you friendships, relationships, opportunities. And sometimes what you believe is something that's not even that unreasonable or immoral, but it goes against the narrative. It goes against the hive mind. And that's kind of the point of what I'm trying to get across when it comes to learning about these fascinating hidden stories of our hidden history. These other potential separate species of humans that may have populated our planet, or the advanced technology that some of them may have utilized and created. It's foolish of us to think that we right now are the most intelligent and most advanced version of humanity. I don't really think that's the case anymore. Excuse me. I really don't think that's the case anymore. The more I listen to other researchers talk about the past, and the more the various books I read, I'm beginning to really suspect and feel that, we really have been dumbed down. Despite the fact that we have iPhones and touchscreens, and electric cars and all that fun jazz, we still can't even replicate the Great Pyramid. We can't do that. There are so many incredible archaeological discoveries we can't even replicate. Yet we consider ourselves extremely advanced. Yet we can't replicate any of that. We can't replicate Machu Picchu. We can't replicate the Cusco Wall. We can't. Yet we call ourselves super advanced. And I'm not saying that we aren't advanced in our civilization and our capabilities, but let's be real here. They were clearly way more advanced in the past. And perhaps the past was the future that we envision for today. How wild would that be if that was the case? Yet here we are, as Graham Hancock says, a species with amnesia, but at the same time, we're being dumbed down. To the point where, you got PragerU telling you that slavery was good for black people and all sorts of nonsense. And there you have, just more, pseudo, propaganda, American history that's being told. And that's what's so disingenuous about, being in the education system, or being part of these, elitist schools, or being part of these, archaeological foundations and societies. They don't allow you to challenge the narrative. They don't allow you to challenge the truth of their discoveries, of their belief system, because they don't want to lose their tenure. They don't want to lose their book deals. They don't want to lose their 10-minute spotlights on various news channels. They don't want to lose the funding for their expeditions, where they pretty much regurgitate the same information over and over and over again and tell us, oh yeah, that's the truth. It's foolish, and it's disingenuous, and it's insulting, I feel, to the average human. It doesn't matter where you live. They're lying to you about your history in one way or another, whether you live in North America, South America, Europe, Asia. I mean, they're lying to you in some way or form about your history. And there are people who are at the top, who run many of these, institutions, where that is the goal, that is the point. People are paid to create a lie for us to believe in regards to our history, in regards to our way of life, in regards to what it means to be human. And I'm not here to, I don't, and I hope I don't sound like I'm like talking down, or trying to sound like high and mighty, because I'm still learning myself. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that, you know we as individuals who advocate for freedom of thought and freedom of expression, we need to guide other people, and not necessarily force them, but present them questions and ideas where they can kind of go home and reflect on it themselves. I'm all for challenging our foundational belief system. I'm all for it. That's the only way we grow as a species. That's the only way we grow as humans. And that's the only way we grow as individuals. And, as I always talk about in my in the Monday Mindset, my motivational podcast series, I talk about how, a community of individuals that are unified in their goals and their belief system can do incredible things. And, we don't have that type of leadership right now when it comes to our history, when it comes to our education, our health, uh, our entertainment, whatever it may be. We don't have that anymore. And it seems to me, and the things that I have been researching and reading, it seems like ancient civilizations advocated for that and seem to have been unified under those types of ideas. And that's what I mean by, it seems to me that they seem to have been more advanced in their technology, their way of life, their way of thinking than we are as of now. And I put that in myself, including in that as well. We are all being limited in our potentiality of our possibilities. And I hope that someday, we're able to utilize all of our potentialities. We're able to actually look at our true history and actually use the true knowledge in there that could actually benefit humanity and society. But if you listen to my show and you're into the things that I'm kind of into, that they don't want that for us, because they can't profit off of freedom in the sense of what we would like and what ancient civilizations probably practice more. True freedom with true prosperity and true capitalism and true uh, religion and true beliefs and true hopes. And I know that I might be sounding a bit woo-woo here, but the more I really think about it and reflect on it, the more I'm convinced that ancient civilizations, that were so advanced at that time, definitely, I feel, really understood in what it meant to be human, way better than what we are capable of understanding right now. And the more and more they continue to suppress our capability to um, reflect and meditate on those ideas, the less and less we lose sight of what it means to be human. And you're seeing so much of that right now in the climate of the world, the way people are behaving and reacting to one another. People are losing a little bit of what it means to be human. And I think, part of that is because we don't really know what it means to be human. We don't know the origins of our humanity. And perhaps had we were given the information to know the origins of our humanity, to know the truth, then perhaps people would have a more appreciative and better understanding of one another and wouldn't approach and look at each other by our races, and more by our creeds and our morals and our ethics. But I just think that it's something that we all need to take into consideration and to be mindful about as we grow and evolve as individuals. And this stuff, when in regards to whether it's giants or elongated skulls or any of this kind of stuff, there is always a bit of truth in legends. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Lounge Ronin, all things, everything. If you made it this far, please make sure to hit that like button and make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell and leave a comment with your thoughts below, as that would definitely help to get this video out there, and give a dash of constructive criticism, as that would help me to make better content and to be better at what I'm trying to do here and what I'm trying to grow. So please, any little bit of help would be greatly appreciative. And until next time, stay positive, stay focused,